Okay, over to you, Bob.
So, yes, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm very impressed with what I've heard so far from Antonia and Helen. It does sort of restrict the range of things I want to cover, but there will be a little bit of duplication. So I'm still a full-time GP, seeing patients, but every day I'm feeling the effects of this stealth, secretive destruction of the NHS. I'm just going to share my screen. As Helen's pointed out, this has taken decades to get to where we are. And what I've put up there is a timeline. And what the timeline is trying to capture is how none of this was some unfortunate series of accidents. This has been a well-planned cross-party project. We often misframe this as politicians making mistakes and failing. They're not failing. They've been extremely successful. It might have taken them a bit longer than they expected to, but what they have in fact done to the NHS is totally mutated it, totally repurposed it, with the bloated management structure that Helen mentioned, driving up the cost of administering the NHS, the asset stripping of buildings and land through the use of PFI. The other component of PFI was the massive covert bed closure program. For every PFI hospital, the NHS shrank. So now we have a major capacity problem that nobody's wanting to address. Why don't they want to address it? Because the private sector are stepping in. This is a problem which they've deliberately created, for which they had a predetermined solution. What else happened with the series of legal changes? You had the compulsory, what was an artificial phony internal market, becoming a compulsory external market in 2012. And the creation of these new insurance-based bodies called clinical commissioning groups. So it's a transitional phase, clinical commissioning groups. We had the re-importation of Simon Stevens, who came back after a decade spent at United Health, America's biggest insurer. And at the helm of the NHS, he produced various policy documents, but reading between the lines, he was giving the green light to the private sector to start creating business cases for taking over more and more function of the NHS. And that was followed by, only last year, what I believe to be the final legislative nail in the coffin of the NHS, which was the creation of these integrated care systems. And put very simply, these are new public-private partnerships funded by the taxpayer, run by private corporations, in charge of delivering care for a population of 1 to 2 million. And from the budget they are given, any money they do not spend on delivering patient care will be kept as profit. So these corporations have a fiduciary duty to maximize profit, and that will be done by denying care to patients who need it. To put it more bluntly, that means allowing patients to languish, suffer, and die unnecessarily. This is no political mistake. This is political intent. And it's not a party intent. It's a political establishment attempt at destroying what's left of public service provision and redirecting our tax base into private company profits and shareholder dividend, and let's not forget executive pay. So that's what that's what was the result of all this legislation. So what else are they doing? Well, not only are they transferring the assets and the budgets, but they are de-skilling the workforce. Now, one way of getting rid of experienced, expensive people is to grind them out, as we heard Antonia describing. The moral injury inflicted on people who can remember how the NHS used to function, how it used to deliver high quality care, how the staff got job satisfaction, felt good about what they were doing. Now that is increasingly difficult, next to impossible, if you're running an emergency service like A&E. Once you get rid of the staff, or you treat them so horrendously by stealing a third of their wages over a decade of austerity and not coming up with a reasonable pay settlement, again, this is no mistake. You need to drive out these expensive, qualified people who may have a conscience and may be able to speak out about the decimation of quality. Well, you need to replace them with unqualified people or less qualified people. And that's what this article headline is pointing out from LBC earlier. I think it was this week. So the de-skilling, to put it another way, is a dumbing down of NHS staff. Now, it shouldn't take a genius to work out that has huge patient safety implications. You're going to have people who don't know what they don't know, with a huge blind spot through which patients will be harmed and allowed to die preventably. So that's what de-skilling means. The Health and Care Act that went through last year allows for the deregulation of staff, and that's what these new roles are. They're unregulated. They don't have a requirement to have a certain standard or reach a certain level of performance or competence. So this is a race to the bottom. Now, our allies in this struggle are not just the working class and the poor, because actually those aren't really the targets of the reforms. They are the victims. They will be allowed to suffer and die. That is of no consequence. The target of the reforms is the tax money allocated to healthcare and the growing private insurance market, which has been created by the contraction of NHS provision and the obvious headlines that are in the news about declining quality of service and waiting lists. Waiting lists are a push factor for people to take out private insurance or pay out of pocket. Well, it's these middle class who are the targets of the reforms. It's their wallets that these people are interested in. What I've put on the screen now is a chart from the Sunday Times of a person, a King's Counsel, who in 2014 was paying £6,000 a year for his health insurance with Bupa, who after contracting a cancer with complications, by the end of 8 years was asked to pay £164,000. Now, I put it to you, he's equally a victim of what's gone on as everybody else. He has just as much interest in preserving high quality universal healthcare as any of us do, but they don't know it. And why don't they know it? Because our media and political establishment have kept them in the dark, as have our unions, as Helen explained, keeping a very narrow focus on pay and totally ignoring the elephant in the room of privatization and corporate capture of our NHS. So this graph, I think, sums up our politicians' intent. Again, I want to stress this is no accident. Our politicians are willfully copying the American system. And what this graph shows down the bottom axis is health expenditure per capita, and along the vertical axis is life expectancy. And what you might see looking at the red line, which is the American line, they spend more than twice the average European expenditure, but they die younger. And the reason is that money isn't going to patient care. That money is being siphoned away. And our country, our politicians in England, want to drive the UK, which sits in the middle of that grouping, downwards and to the right. And what does that mean? People dying younger, people suffering more, while we pay double than what we're currently paying. And that double is made up through taxation and additional cost of healthcare, be that out of pocket or taking out an insurance policy to make up for what we have lost. Now, I'm hoping everybody listening tonight can understand that the health workers, the doctors, the nurses, everybody who is employed to deliver healthcare has the same interest as the patient. and has the same interest as taxpayers. We are all on the same side, but we don't know it because our various groupings can't see any common interest here. Now, that is a major flaw in how we've tackled this problem. And who are we against? We are against a small media political elite who have been bought off by private foreign corporations. Now, I put it to you, if enough people understood what we've outlined today, there will be an almighty pushback. And our only problem is the traditional sources of that information, our unions, our representative bodies, as Helen pointed out earlier, have been co-opted. And our challenge, I believe our challenge is to take control of those organizations back from the grassroots and do what they're supposed to do, which is represent their members and act in the public interest. Because what they have signed up to is going to cause not only a lot of human suffering, but it's also an economically self-harming, suicidal act of, vandalism. So I will leave it there. Thank you.